Mr. Richardson came up to the checkout at the supermarket with only the most essential groceries in his cart and began to lay them out on the table. All the while, the elderly man kept silently moving his lips, trying to calculate in his mind the total cost of his purchase. Seeing the gray-haired old man standing in front of her, the cashier made a displeased face and said, "Can you go faster, or should I take a nap while you get your stuff?" Now, I'll be quick. I'm just trying to calculate in my head if I had enough money for the purchase." Mr. Richardson was embarrassed to answer. "Well, that's something you could have figured out at home, playing with the math. It's a supermarket here, so move along and don't hold up the line," the cashier snapped. Mr. Richardson took a look around and saw only one customer behind him. It was a young Muslim man who patiently waited his turn. "Okay, I'll just be a moment. I hope I have enough money," the old man thought with anguish, wincing at the pain in his joints, sick with arthritis. "It'll be $122, said the cashier, who quickly scanned the goods. Hearing the amount, Mr. Richardson pulled out a $100 bill from a shabby wallet and began to rummage in search of cash. "Are you going to be digging there for long? If you don't have the money, just stay home. No need to go to the store," the cashier said, irritated. "If you don't have enough, let me pay the rest," said the Muslim man, offering the old man his help. "No thanks, I've already got most of it. Now just one more dollar and that's it," Mr. Richardson replied, dripping with sweat. He really didn't want to take the help of the self-confident young man behind him. Mr. Richardson finally found the required amount and handed it over to the cashier. Pursing her lips, the woman threw the bag of groceries to the old man and turned to the next customer as if nothing happened. Meanwhile, Mr. Richardson headed for the exit, hunched over under the weight of the groceries. The bag wasn't actually heavy at all, but for the elderly man in poor health, it was an overwhelming load. In his younger years, Mr. Richardson worked in a hazardous environment, and now being older, he felt the echoes of his hard labor more and more often. The old man's mood was hopelessly ruined by his interaction with the rude cashier. Thus, trying to forget about the humiliating incident as soon as possible, he approached the crossing in order to get to the opposite side of the street, as it was a shortcut to his home. Lost in thought, Mr. Richardson stepped fearlessly onto the white lines on the road. But before he had time to go half of the way, a white SUV, driven by a middle-aged woman, stopped a few inches from him, its brakes screeching. Gesturing in rage, she began to shout at Mr. Richardson, who froze in place in surprise. "What are you looking at, old man? I'm not a painting for you to admire. Move along. I'm late for a meeting," the owner of the SUV screamed, leaning out of the car. Tears welled up in Mr. Richardson's eyes. He was overwhelmed with resentment. "Is that how it goes? Once you buy yourself an expensive car, the rules no longer apply to you? Look at her go. Not only did she almost run me over, she also thinks she's in the right here," the old man thought, outraged over such an attitude towards himself. But the lady behind the wheel didn't even think about calming down, getting only louder and more disrespectful with every second. Mr. Richardson was at such a loss over the woman's attitude that he couldn't seem to find the strength to move. Suddenly, he felt someone's hand on his shoulder. The old man turned sharply and saw the same Muslim man who stood behind him at the checkout just a few minutes ago. The young man smiled encouragingly at Mr. Richardson and walked over to the desperately honking SUV driver. The old man didn't know what exactly it was that the stranger said to the indignant woman, but after his words, she calmed down noticeably and began to wait patiently. And meanwhile, the young man took Mr. Richardson by the arm and led him to the opposite side of the street. "Thanks, you helped me out. I'll take it from here," the old man said, still trembling from the experience. But to Mr. Richardson's great surprise, the young man took his bag and said, "Don't worry about it. I'll help you. Honestly, it's no trouble at all. And about the situation with the driver, forget about it. Or even better, try to understand her." "Understand her? Did you say understand her? How's that even possible? She almost killed me, didn't she?" Mr. Richardson asked, still emotional. The young man smiled in response and said, "Personally, I don't judge people. I try to either imagine myself in their place or figure out the initial reason for their behavior. "Trust me, life is much easier without anger in your heart," answered the guy without a hint of embarrassment. Mr. Richardson frowned and shook his head doubtfully. Frankly speaking, the philosophy of the helpful stranger seemed rather far-fetched to him. Even though the old man understood, deep down, that the Muslim man was right. If you accept the world as it is, you can avoid resentment and false expectations. On their way home, Mr. Richardson discussed many hot issues with the young man. He also learned that the kind stranger's name was Rahim. Overall, Rahim liked the old man, who quickly changed his attitude towards him after their sincere and frank conversation. In parting, Rahim shook Mr. Richardson's hand and wished him a pleasant day. Shuffling his trampled shoes, the old man entered his dilapidated house and, having caught his breath, began to put away the groceries. Mr. Richardson was poor, so he saved every penny and could only buy the essentials at the store. God didn't bless him with children, and his wife died 10 years ago. Now he was always sad and lonely, spending his nights all alone. Putting away the groceries, Mr. Richardson suddenly thought about his wallet, which he couldn't find anywhere. Sure, there was virtually no money in it, just some change. And then an awful thought came to the old man's mind. Did the Muslim man steal it? He sure did. Why else would he come up to me? And he even carried my grocery bag. What a jerk. He distracted me with his stories and stole my wallet in the meantime, thought Mr. Richardson sadly. The old man didn't care about the little money that was left in his wallet. Mr. Richardson's heart was filled with resentment over the fact that he behaved like an idiot and allowed himself to get tricked. The old man's eyes were full of bitter tears. Pursing his lips resentfully, he abruptly emptied the entire bag on the table, and among all the groceries was the old man's wallet. Now Mr. Richardson immediately felt embarrassed, and his cheeks turned red with blush. The old man was ashamed of the fact that he suspected Rahim of theft. Picking up his wallet, Mr. Richardson decided to take a look inside to make sure the little change he had left was still there. That's when a tight bundle of $100 bills fell out of it and lay down on the table like a fan. Just look at that. That guy surely knows how to pickpocket. How skillful was he, taking the wallet out and putting it back in the bag. But instead of taking the last of my money, he put more money in my wallet. Although maybe it's just some kind of a mistake? Mr. Richardson exclaimed in surprise and began to cry again. Only this time, it was tears of joy, not grief. And he had a good reason for that. Looking more closely at the money, the old man noticed an invitation to a magic show by some illusionist there. The invitation had a picture of Rahim on it. Mr. Richardson didn't hesitate much before deciding to attend the show. He wanted to show his respect for the kind magician who saw how poor the old man was and decided to help him. The magic show was a success. It ended with a standing ovation, which spoke of the illusionist's talent better than any words could, barely managing to make his way through the crowd of admirers of Rahim's talent. Mr. Richardson took his hand and wholeheartedly thanked him for his help. The thing was that the old man had saved up money for a surgery to restore his eyesight for many years, and now, thanks to Rahim's help, his dream could finally come true. The kind magician didn't know what to say at first, but then told Mr. Richardson that he spends all of his fees on helping those in need. Sometimes my friends tell me about people in need. Sometimes I meet them on the street, as was the case with you. I want to help those who have no one else to help them, Rahim explained, looking down shyly. And then Rahim added that he was HIV positive and didn't think of saving up money as anything other than a pointless waste of precious time. Rahim has long realized that he got real pleasure by helping those in need and not caring about the size of his wallet. Using his illusionist skills, the young man quietly gave money to the poor without them even noticing at the time, thus managing to remain in the shadows, and only Mr. Richardson managed to reveal his secret. After hearing the young magician out, the old man teared up. Embarrassed by his own feelings, Mr. Richardson took a small Bible, which was passed down from generation to generation in his family. The old man had no children, so he decided to give this Bible to the man who came to his aid in a difficult time. "Thank you. This is a great honor for me. And although I profess Islam, I do respect the believers of other religions," Rahim answered and hugged the old man. The young man didn't know it back then, but sometime later, he would donate this valuable relic to the church. He'd go to a Sunday service and meet a girl there, also HIV positive. Thus, the Bible, which Rahim got from Mr. Richardson, would play an important role in the young illusionist's future. And that's true, because if it wasn't for the Bible, Rahim would have never gone to that church and would have never met the girl who turned out to be his soulmate and would later become his wife.